Ladies and gents, Amber Case.
Good morning, Your Majesties. Thank you so much for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd love for you to hold up your phones. Could you just hold your phones up if you have them? There we go. That's great. So I'd like to tell you that you're all cyborgs. Some of you are more reluctant cyborgs than others. Some of you took a while to hold up your phones. Some of you were very fast. But you don't need to be Terminator or RoboCop to be a cyborg. All you need is to be in a relationship with a device. Our lives have changed in the last 15 years. Now we wake up next to our phones. They cry, and we have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep. They get hungry, and we have to plug them into the wall and feed them. We end up taking better care of our devices than we do ourselves. They are often the first thing we see in the morning before our significant other, and they're often the last thing that we see at night before we go to sleep. The Greeks had two concepts for time. One was chronos time, a very industrial time. The idea of this chronos time is that you schedule a meeting at a certain time, there's a very specific agenda, and this is what you do during that time. It's a good time for reproducing the same thing again and again. It's a good kind of time for being consistent. But there's a human time, and that human time gets interrupted every time you get a notification on your phone. And that human time, the Greeks called kairos time. Kairos time is the time that you forget that time exists. It's the time of falling in love. It's the time of watching children take their first steps. It's the time of coming to a new conclusion, of feeling that you have thought something differently. It's the time of being bored, the time of reflection, the time of staring at the ocean. This is the human time where we get our innovations. This is the time that children exist in when they play, when they find the edges of things. When we take away that time, when there's too much chronos time, then we aren't fulfilling our human potential. We aren't being the weird, strange, fascinating, silly people that we're supposed to be. And we can't expect to change the world or change the future if we don't allow ourselves to have that time. So in this speech, I'd like to talk about a concept called calm technology. And calm technology came from Xerox PARC, a research institute, in the 1990s. The idea is that for the very first time, devices outnumber humans. There are more devices on the planet than there are people. It's predicted that there could be even 50 billion devices by 2020. We don't know how many devices there will be. But when people give me these new statistics, I like to ask whether this sounds good. Remember, the original promise of technology was to give us more time, not less time? Does anyone have more time because of technology? Remember, the original concept of technology was for empowerment, to give us more creativity as a tool. The earliest humans used tools to extend the capability of their fists with a hammer, to extend their teeth with a knife. We are tool-using creatures. And my question is, are we using our tools, or are our tools using us? Do we have control over it, and can we change it? And can we build better technology? And because many of you in this room are students and are young, you have the ability to start to change this. Remember that everything that you touch, except for nature, is built by humans. Almost everything surrounding you is made by people. And that means it can be changed. It can be redesigned. And so if you find yourself frustrated by something, even the most minimal thing, remember that you can change it because it was originally designed by somebody, and all the innovation is in the boring everyday. So let's look at a few different technologies. First, we have the smartwatch, which replicates a lot of the notifications you already have on your phone and brings them to your arm, which can be okay. It can prevent you from looking at your phone and getting distracted. But then it gets to be a problem when you have things like the smart fridge. There are a lot of large tech companies that say, we need to put new connected chips into everything. We need to allow your fridge to tweet and Facebook post for you. We need to allow your television to post on your behalf. We need to, at some point, if everything's connected, everything can be hacked. And suddenly your house becomes a hacker itself. And the bandwidth that you want to use to watch Netflix ends up being eaten up by your fridge. Plus, people keep telling me, well, we want to have a product that tells you when the bananas have gone bad. And I say, look, nature has given us a peel. And the peel on the banana tells you when it's bad. That's a smart technology. We don't need a bunch of chips or a $2 million backed startup from Silicon Valley that doesn't understand any accent at all when we try to speak to it, that will go out of business in a couple of years to tell us that the bananas have gone bad. When you put all of these things together, you get what I like to call the dystopian kitchen of the future. Everything is written in a different programming language. It's sending you notifications constantly. It's taking up all of the bandwidth. It's hackable. And any of these things, if you sell your house, you'll have to give the passcodes to the next people that come in, and they might not be able to do it. If any of these go out of business, your fridge no longer works, your stove no longer works. We're already seeing a little bit of this. It's even worse when you rely on it for the life of somebody. If Twitter goes down, it's not a big deal. Early technology was made so that it didn't have to fail. It was made with the smallest amount of technology possible because there were limitations. Now we have the ability to make anything with technology, and so we start creating systems like this. This is a startup called petnet.io. The idea behind this startup is that you don't have to worry about feeding or watering your pet anymore. This will be done online. And you can Skype, you can video message your pet as well. So a lot of people were very excited about this. But what happened was that the server failed. And for a couple of days, nobody knew if their pet was alive or dead. They didn't know where their pet was. They didn't have the ability to feed their pet. And I talked to the people who created the startup, and I said, there are plenty of products before this that they just ran on the power in your home and you set a timer. You never had to worry about your pet. You should have had offline support. It should have still worked when the technology failed. And they said, oh, sorry, that was a new feature that we would have implemented, and we didn't implement it. There was no consequences for the potential loss of life because they didn't think through the consequences. In fact, in the terms of service, it actually said PetNet is not responsible for any service failures. You agree you will not rely on the services for the critical, safe purposes of your pet. You will not rely on our services for your pet, but on the cover of the site, you don't have to worry about your pet ever again. So they had no liability, and this is how technology is being built today. Build it very fast. Don't worry about the consequences. This needs to change. So we have an era of interruptive technology. It's interrupting our sleep. The blue light prevents us from having melatonin production, so we can't get to sleep as well. It's messaging us constantly. The battery is running out. The apps are taking up all of the space on our phone. We weren't reliant on this 15 years ago, and now we are. So what's the opposite of this? I was writing my thesis in college on cell phones in 2007, right when the iPhone came out. And I started watching people get very excited about these devices. And in a way, they're very powerful. You can do so many things with mobile technology. Once the phone was unleashed from the cord and became part of our pocket, it presented amazing opportunities for us, but it also meant that we could be interrupted at any time. So I found this concept of calm technology. This is Mark Weiser, who is deceased. He didn't live to see the future that he predicted. He predicted ubiquitous computing, or Internet of Things. And John Seeley Brown, and they worked at Xerox PARC in the 80s and 90s. And what they said is that at some point, devices will outnumber us. And the scarce resource will no longer be technology. The scarcest resource will be our attention. And how devices work with our attention or don't work with our attention will make or break them. This is their paper, The Coming Age of Calm Technology. At some point, we all shared a very large computer. People would sign up for a specific time, Bill Gates would sneak out of his house at night when he was in high school so that he could use a little bit of time on a very large, very expensive computer. And now many devices share each of us. And that becomes a problem because they're taking our attention as a desktop computer would. One of their other papers said, the world is not a desktop. With a desktop computer, you sit in front of it, all of your attention is focused on the screen. It has perfect battery life, it's plugged into the wall, it's plugged into a powered connection to the internet. It's the same screen real estate. But once you take that amount of focus and you put it into your pocket, and you try to make people focus in the same way, you end up with a problem. You end up with people getting in car accidents. A car makes very good use of your attention. Everything is in your peripheral view so that you can focus on the road. You can glance back and forth to get the information. The minute you put your phone in front of you, it takes all of that peripheral attention away, and it becomes very dangerous. So we can use these concepts. A lot of people talk about the interface and technology becoming invisible. But the original idea of this was not that technology becomes invisible. Mark Weiser said that a very good piece of technology, you dissolve into it. Your brain works with the technology. When you read a very good book, your brain dissolves into the book. You're no longer there. You don't see the pages anymore. You end up knowing and caring about the people in the book more than you know your next door neighbor. That's an incredible tool, an incredible interface. When you are working well with a nicely made tool, if you're a woodworker, anything that you're an expert on, you dissolve into the tool. The tool amplifies your humanness and your creativity, and you forget about it. That's the original idea of invisible technology. Not that technology will be everywhere. That's incredibly expensive. Everything can go wrong. It's that the tools are so good that we don't notice we're using them. We blend into them. They amplify our humanness, and they help us along. So how do we design a calm technology? If you're looking to design new things, how can we take advantage of some of these principles? Because Mark Weiser is no longer with us, I wanted to try to revive some of his research. And one of his principles is that technology shouldn't take all of our attention, just some of it, and only when necessary. So a tea kettle, for instance, you set it, you forget it, it calls to you when it's ready. It's a very straightforward piece of technology. You don't have to watch it the whole time. Technology should empower your peripheral attention. We have very high resolution attention here, and many new devices make use of this very high resolution screen real estate. And because of that, they have these lit displays, and everything is complex, and everything is in a specific language, and it needs to be translated. But we have all of this attention around here. We have this attention with a small tone or a beep. We have attention here. If we have a buzz, we can feel something. We don't need to be so visual. Everything has become this visual channel. And if we get distracted like that, we can't think anymore. This is a silly example, but this is something you wear around your waist, and if you're slouching, it buzzes you. But the idea behind this is that it uses a different sense. It's not using your visual sense. So eventually you feel something, and it corrects your behavior. But more seriously, I used to have an employee that had an insulin pump. And the insulin pump, he was very excited about this. He had this insulin pump installed, and I had a meeting with him, and he beeped. And it was incredibly upsetting because he was in movies, he was at a funeral, and he beeped, and everybody thought he was being incredibly rude. They thought his phone was on. And I said, "Can you turn off the beep?" And he said, "No. The device manufacturer doesn't allow you to change the alert style. I can't turn the beep off. I can't turn it into a buzz, so when I'm at a loud concert, I don't know when I need to refill the insulin." It's even worse than before. It was supposed to be a technology that helped him, but because the device manufacturers assumed that he would always be in a quiet situation and could hear the beep, he was stuck with it. There wasn't any other device on the market that he could choose. He was stuck with one choice and one device. And I think the goal of this is to point out that we don't know what situation people will use a technology in. And because we don't know, we need to allow people to change the alert style. We need to allow people to adapt the technology to them, because they're the ones wearing it and carrying it around with them. I talked to a bunch of different parents who had children with insulin pumps, and the insulin pumps would beep and annoy the class, and they wouldn't be able to focus as well, and they were made fun of. And the device manufacturer said, sorry, we can't change the notification. Technology should inform and calm. How do you give people information while remaining calm? How do you give people something and give them a kind of ambient awareness? Ambient awareness is where you can just walk into a room and know something without having to look at a display. This is a light fixture. It's a Hue light bulb. It's an internet-connected light bulb. This was my old kitchen. And the idea behind this is that it was just attached to a weather report. So I lived in Portland, Oregon at the time, and it was very rainy. So this light was usually blue. I would wake up in the morning and it would be light blue. So I knew there was going to be rain out. But then one day I walked into my kitchen and it was yellow. And I knew it was going to be sunny. It's as simple as that. I don't need a disembodied human voice telling me the weather report or a display. I could just have information in my environment like this with a simple light. This is a different way of thinking. It's not as exciting, it's not as new, but it lasts. This can last for years, and it's not intrusive. If I want more resolution, I can go to the wall and I can look at the iPad that's attached to the wall and I can look at the weather report if I want. Technology should amplify the best of what humans can do and the best of what technology can do. Technology is very good at detecting patterns over time. Humans are stuck in a very specific time zone of human time. So we can't notice these patterns as well. So the best technology combines the two. It amplifies what humans can do and amplifies what machines can do. So for instance, Google search doesn't tell you the exact result that you want. It gives you a choice. It uses what humans have tagged pages with to give you a series of results, and then you're making the decision. We have a lot of science fiction movies about letting technology make decisions for us, like war games. It always ends in disaster. Humans are incredible curators. If we have the technology work alongside us, then we are stronger than technology on its own or humans on its own. If we let the technology try to control us, it will usually fail. There are a lot of people out there that say technology can one day understand us better than we do ourselves. But that's just information, that's not wisdom. It still takes a person to interpret the information. So we have to remember that we need to work alongside technology because we've always worked alongside of our tools. And if we don't, we lose something in the process. We end up getting it wrong and being stuck in situations that we can't get out of. This is my friend Todd Huffman, and he was very upset by biologists because they were scanning tissue samples, and they would take a very long time to scan a tissue sample. It takes a lot of training, and you have to scan it, and then maybe you can scan the tissue for a year or two, and then your eyesight starts to go and your hands get really tired. So he said, I'm going to make a robot tissue sample scanner. It will take a three-dimensional piece of tissue, and it will use a diamond knife, and it will cut through the tissue. And it will scan it at the same time and upload it into a database. And then a doctor can say whether that became cancerous or not. And it's that cybernetic feedback loop. We've lost this term, cybernetics. We've lost this feedback loop term. It's that feedback loop of humans and machines that allow us to determine, even better than just technology by its own, or even a human by its own, whether something becomes cancerous or not. But this machine scans tissue 1,500 times faster than a human, leaving humans available to do interesting work, to think about things, to make new cures. And this system gets better over time because the feedback loop improves the cancer detection so quickly and so rapidly because there's both humans and machines. Then we get real innovation, we get real improvement. Technology can communicate but doesn't need to speak. How many of you like C-3PO from Star Wars? Okay. How many of you like R2-D2? Okay, that's more general consensus. So C-3PO might know 200,000 languages, but he's annoying in the 200,000 languages. But R2-D2 knows one language. R2-D2 knows the beep, 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 like these tones and these screams, and you know exactly how R2-D2 is feeling. because you can read the tonal language. When we try to make technology that communicates in a specific spoken language, we expect that we can interact with it like we do a human. But that technology will never be as sophisticated as human or have the context. So we have to be very careful about it, and we have to say, if we just had a tonal language, we wouldn't have to translate it into all these different languages and get it wrong. This is an early installation. So at Xerox PARC, where printers were created and the graphic user interface and Ethernet and a lot of these technologies, the company hired strange people. They didn't just hire technologists, they hired artists and philosophers and anthropologists. And those countered the idea of the pure engineer. There's a great story about an anthropologist named Lucy Suchman and printers. And the legend goes that engineers were very proud of the printer copier machine. There were so many buttons that you could press, you could do anything with it. But people were putting these printer copy machines in the corner of their office because they hated the devices. They were very complicated, people were fearful of them, they required a special technician to use them. So the anthropologist came in and said, most people just want to make a copy. Why don't you make a big green copy button? Why don't you focus on what the people want to do instead of what you as engineers think people want to do? And so you have to counter with all of these things. The most important innovations come from the mundane, taking the hairdryer and making it quieter. The hairdryer hadn't been innovated in 60 years until Dyson tried to make a quiet hairdryer. The copy printer machine could have stayed very, very expensive and very hated unless an anthropologist came in and said, most people just want to do these tasks. Why don't we just have a button that's very large that allows people to do most of the things? And that becomes an entry point. We have to remember to counter everything and to be silly and have this human time within our organizations, or we miss out on very clear examples of how we should be building things. This actually is, so Natalie Germanjenko was an artist that worked with Mark Weiser, and she said, well, why don't we take all of the server information that's going on at Xerox PARC, and whenever anything interesting is happening, I'll install this piece of plastic to the ceiling and that will whir around if something interesting is happening. And so you could kind of hear this, and then everybody would run out of their offices, and they would look at the piece of string, and they would try to figure out who was doing what. This was like an early social network in that way. But it got everybody out, and it got them to talk with each other instead of sticking in their rooms. This is a really interesting concept you could use for almost anything, whether it's making sure a server is okay or making sure there's an alert system. It's just an indicator, but it's just in your peripheral attention. The Roomba uses the tone language. When it's done, it goes dun da da da, and when it's stuck, it goes dun dun. And you know, no matter where you are in the world, that it's stuck or it's successful. And it's so adorable and not very good at what it does. It doesn't even clean corners. But the Roomba is a magical device because it doesn't do everything. You have to help it. And when you have to help the technology out, you become endeared to it. You care about it more. It's so cute that cats ride around on it in YouTube videos. It's like the Tamagotchi, those little pocket pets that you had to feed. These are really important because you had to help the technology, and therefore it became bonded to you. Instead of having a Terminator-like thing where the technology is doing everything for you, you can deliberately make things that aren't complete so that in helping the technology, you plus the machine are more than two. Technology should consider social norms. 15 years ago, it was terrifying to think that everyone would have a video camera or a camera in their pockets on their phone. We thought it was the end of privacy. There were so many news articles about this. But now, it's totally normal. Everyone has a video camera in their pockets, and we're not terrified of each other because we all have it. We've become used to it. You hold up your phone and everyone knows what you're doing. So that norm is invisible. We don't notice it anymore. But anything that tries to restore you to that norm, like eyeglasses restore you to 20/20 vision, or in this case, having a phone restores you to the norm, that's totally accepted, even decorative. But when you try to have something above the norm that's not accessible to everybody, that becomes enhancing technology, that becomes scary. When Google Glass came out, they had too many features. It's not that technology isn't ready for humans. Humans are usually the ones not ready for technology. And so when you're building it, you have to remember that. You have to say, There's a kind of metabolism rate. You can't feed somebody all of the tech at once. You have to say, this generation, we're allowed to digest maybe a single feature. When this created everything all at once, journalists focused on the scariest thing, that you could persistently record with it. Of course, there wasn't enough battery life to do that for more than 15 minutes, but no one's going to talk about that. And so you could predict that the product would fail the minute it came out. And it's a shame because it could have been interesting. But if you compare it to the iPhone took so many years to develop. First it was an iPod, and then it was an iPod Touch until the touch screen became the norm. And then an internet connection and a cell connection showed up, and then GPS. And so we slowly adopted this device over 15, 20 years, and we weren't terrified of it because we got accustomed to it. There are a lot of people that want to make something so new all of the time, but all of the answers are in innovating the old and respecting it and bringing it into the new era. It's this kind of medium route that we forget because we worship the new, and we worship the new in technology because we don't know what's wrong with it yet. If we look at the old, we know what's wrong, so how do we slightly improve it? Just a slight improvement will change everything and make products that make money and improve people's lives. All of the mundane things in your life that you just pass over, those are billion-dollar companies that will change how we interact with things. It's a future in which design means so much more because it's every single day and every single interaction. The right amount of tech is the minimum to solve the problem. How do you take something away until there's nothing left to take away? How do you design a technology so beautiful that it's like calligraphy? Every single feature that you add to a piece of technology makes it capable of a new kind of failure. You need to support that new thing, you need to train that, but if you take away these features, or you very slowly add them on, they'll be less likely to fail. You'll have something that lasts for a longer time. It's more difficult to do, it's more boring to create. It takes a little bit more time at the front. But you end up having something that lasts possibly for generations. Can you imagine being able to have your phone for 10 years? That every time there's a new software update, your phone gets more space on it and not less. It gets better to use, it gets more elegant, it gets more beautiful. That would be a wonderful thing. Instead, things keep trudging along and we have to keep installing new things. I would love to be able to hand down a piece of technology like a very nice piece of furniture or a watch, that it could be an heirloom. These are some of my favorite technologies. A street light is like punctuation. It tells you when to stop and start, or a comma, it tells you when to pause. If we made street lights today, you would have to Bluetooth your car to them, and then they would give you a countdown on your phone, and then you'd have to disengage from them. It would be this horrible thing. Because these are just a light indicator, you can glance up and see where they are. We end up using these all the time, but we don't remember them. That's where the calm technology comes in. We don't notice it anymore. That's dissolved. This toilet occupied sign on the plane is just a pictogram. You don't have to know any specific language to understand this. This is the only symbol that doesn't seem to change on a plane, where everything else changes, Wi-Fi and all these other things. These are the overlooked things. I would encourage you to look at the things that people don't look at and say, I wonder why that is the way it is. Could it be improved? Because that's the opportunity. Technology should make use of the near and the far. If you put your phone on airplane mode right now, what can you do? You can take a photo, maybe record something. But do you have access to any of your information? When we had desktop computers, we had access to everything. We never even had to touch the web because there wasn't a web. So how do we bring some of that back? If we have all of our personal data stored with other sites, we have no control over it. Wouldn't it be nice if you went to the doctor and you had your own personal data file that you brought with you on your phone, and that you would share that personal data with your doctor for 20 minutes? And when the appointment was over, that new data would be added to your personal data file, and then it would be removed from their servers. That way, every company right now is taking your data and they are responsible, and they do a bad job at this, but they're responsible for protecting that data. That means that companies, in addition to providing a primary service, must also be very good security experts. And nobody is a very good security expert. Everything gets hacked. So keeping your personal data with you and bringing it and sharing it only for 20 minutes at a time means that when something gets hacked, they're only getting what's shared for the last 20 minutes. There's different ways to do this. It's a different model. It's a different approach. And this is a kind of graph about where we've come from and where we're going. So we used to be far away from our computers. We would go to the mainframe computer like Bill Gates sneaking out of his house at night. And then we started to have workstations that were smaller, and then everybody started to have a computer in their household, rooted to place, wired. Then the internet happened, and more of our information was stored away from us. And now we have mainframes again that we can't touch. I can't go to an Amazon cloud server center and go in the door and say, "Hi, I'd like my Facebook photos." They'll kick me out. I mean, I've tried this before. They don't like it at all. They have security. So I don't own my data anymore. And then we have mobile phones that are near us, but our data isn't on those mobile phones. So I'm hoping we can kind of blend it. We can take the best of all these different worlds and we can start to re-centralize our data here around ourselves. This kind of decentralized web movement makes it more secure, more interesting. We don't have to worry as much about where our data is going. And we don't have to replicate sending our data everywhere either. This is the opposite model. Every time you get stuck with something, just flip the axes. Just put it on an axis and flip it around. And you'll be really surprised at what happens, because you get something different that hopefully can solve a lot of these problems. If you process as much as possible on the device itself, and you remember that computers used to look like this. This is the computer that my grandfather worked on. He helped build the 4th node of ARPANET, the first internet. That was the machine that he worked on. And now you have 1,000,000 times that processing power in this phone. Why aren't you processing more on your phone? And remember that this is where it came from, because if you do that, there's an opportunity to do more instead of just do nothing with your phone and constantly grab the cloud. We have upgraded our expectations for streaming video and for connectivity, but we're not upgrading the grid. We're not upgrading our cell towers. We're not upgrading things to 5G. We're not upgrading our bandwidth. And so when all these devices come in and outnumber us, they will become incredibly slow. So how do we make good design? If good design allows you to accomplish your goals in the least amount of moves, then a calm technology does the same thing, but with the least amount of attention. And that is the scarcest resource. Technology should be tested under suboptimal circumstances. Instead of assuming that the technology will always work, because it doesn't, make it so that when it fails, it still works okay. Gracefully degrade it. When an escalator breaks, it turns into stairs. Can we have technology that, when it fails, when you're in airplane mode, when you run out of batteries, things still work? People want to put everything on a mobile application, like a ticket for the subway. But when your phone runs out of batteries, are you stranded, or do you have a backup plan? How do we make sure that even when things are going wrong, when there's no bandwidth, when there's no battery life, when you're stuck, when there's an emergency, things are still okay for you? Because these things are tested in a perfect laboratory with wonderful internet and wonderful battery life. Let's make the smallest amount of tech, the least amount of attention possible, the longest term, the least hackable, spend a little bit more time in the beginning. Because once you do that, you end up with classics, things that change the fabric of society, things that are remembered, things that are celebrated, instead of hated and despised. There's so much opportunity here, but it's really hard to remember because it looks boring. I would encourage you to remember and celebrate the boring and the old, and think the reason why it's boring and old is because it works. How do we remember that? And how do we bring that into the next generation? This is what I think about all the time. As Mark Weiser said, a person's primary task should be being human, not being a computer. The original promise was to give us more time, not less. How do we get more kairos time so that we remember the important things? When you look back on your life, when you're 80 or even 20 years in the future, are you going to remember getting mad at somebody on Facebook? Are you going to remember the Reddit binge that you went on? The Netflix show that you watched? Or are you going to remember falling in love? Which one would you rather have more time for? And again, the scarce resource is our attention. We're at peak attention. So how do we calm that down? I would encourage you to think about how you use your technology, whether you use it like a tool or not. If you need a break, put your phone on airplane mode. Spend 5 minutes and turn off all of the non-human notifications your phone is delivering to you. Change the alert style. You can actually change it on your iPhone so that you can make like a little vibration that goes like deep, 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 like a Morse code. And that way you can assign different Morse code patterns for each person that's trying to get in touch with you. And so you can just feel exactly who's trying to get in touch with you, and you don't have to look at your phone and get distracted. Before you touch your phone in the morning, make a to-do list of what you actually want to do. Maybe try 1 hour a day to not look at your phone at all and get some of that boredom back and that reflection. We forget to journal because we are on our phones all the time. Everything that we produce must be for somebody else. What happened to producing things for ourselves and remembering who we are? I wrote a book on this because Mark Weiser died, and I was really, really upset when I found that out. And so I tried to take his information and bring back some of the concepts from the 90s. And then I realized along the way that sound is incredibly important. The sound of a truck going by. Sound is something you can't turn off. It's one of the fastest senses. And so just reducing sound and changing sounds in our environment can improve our experience. You should wear earplugs on the plane because part of what makes you tired is that it's incredibly loud noise. And your brain keeps processing it. You can close your eyes, but you can't turn off your ears. So think about these experiences in your life and try to improve the quality. Now that we have so many industrial things in our lives, we can't shut these things off, but we can improve them. And we can improve these awful alerts and beeps with all of our dishwashers and appliances and make it so that we can either turn them off or change the style. I made a site that takes all the original research and puts it together. If you read these papers from 1989, 1990, 1995, you'll find some of them are called The Technologist's Responsibility in Social Change. They're papers about privacy and geolocation and security, but they're written in 1989 and they read like today. They're incredibly before their time. This time is now. If you design anything or you want to think about building for the future, I would encourage you to read them. They're very short, very fast. They might make you cry. They're very beautifully written. They're almost poetic. And I think that's the important thing. If you can take a different discipline and add it to technology, you get amazing things happening. So thank you very much.